Welcome to HR Talks with HM Pinnacle. We're your go-to space for real HR stories, practical tips, and strategies to keep the workplace thriving. Whether you're an HR professional, a people leader, or just curious about what goes on behind the scenes, you're in the right place.
Mhm.
Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow for more HR insights, stories, and content that'll help turn everyday challenges into opportunities to grow. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm here with Cara. Welcome, Cara.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Miss Heather, and we're going to talk about something that I personally am jazzed about.
Me too. I love documentation. I
Okay.
think I am the biggest geek until you say that you like it too. Then I don't feel so bad. But oh my goodness, like I
Oh my
think it's
gosh.
awesome.
I do too. Okay. See, and maybe we're perpetuating the stereotype that HR is like not the fun friend at a dinner party because
It's probably true.
it's like my dad is always like, oh, HR, they're the ones that tell you no or ask you to document something. But
Yeah,
there is a reason, and there are tips and tricks and myths
totally.
that we will get to in this conversation. So that's why I'm so excited because though it might sound boring or annoying or tedious, so let's just all address it. Is documentation the most fun topic?
No.
Probably not.
Most people, hold on one sec. Keep talking though. I'm just letting
Oh,
the dog in. Come on,
well, look at
sweetie.
that. See, this is so much fun that even the dog wants to attend.
Exactly. He decided this is where he needed to be.
So that's exactly what we're here for. And documentation will follow us around no matter where we go. So I
True.
think, the areas that I think we should really talk about. So if you're hearing this and you're like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, documentation, I don't need to listen about how to put something on paper, bear with us because maybe you'll learn something about this and tips to maybe make it, a bit more approachable in the future
Yeah.
because this is the foundation of compliance and risk mitigation for every organization, or if you're an employee, yourself. So this
Yeah.
applies to everybody.
It totally does. And I think that there's some law changes that have recently happened that remind us how important documentation is. And I think you and I both have stories where someone wanted to terminate somebody in the organization and came to us and said, I have to get rid of this
Yes.
person. I have to fire them. And I'm like, but you have never documented that they're not doing anything right. And without that
Yeah.
documentation, I can't support it. So, I mean, it's powerful. And I think that's the
100%.
part, even though people don't want to always do it, there is so much power in documentation, both employee and employer. I love that you said that too, Car.
Mhm.
But there's so much power in it that if you're not going to do it for the purpose of compliance or because it's the right thing to do, think about the power that you have in being able to promote somebody with it, to be able
Yeah.
to remove somebody from an organization because of it. It's so critical.
So I think let's start with what like documentation is and what it's not, because I think there are some people who think like, okay, documentation is just, oh my gosh, I have to do a full investigation, this like 80-page book on why I want to terminate Heather from this organization, for example. And that is not what it is. So
Yeah.
let's start there. That is not what it is. But what documentation can be, it can be recordings, it can be photos, it can be the
Emails.
handbook,
Yep.
emails, and I keep on flipping back and forth. And what documentation is not, acknowledgments. You do not have to have an acknowledgement of receipt for the documentation to be valid. And that is huge.
It's huge, and people forget about that. And thank you. I totally hadn't even thought about that. But you don't have to have a signature from the employee to make it a documentation at
Mhm.
all. And so that is such a misconception that people get to, and they're worried that if they do that, then they're going to have their employee upset because they had to sign something, or the employee's not going to sign it, so it no
Mhm.
longer can go in the employee file, etc. And that's absolutely not true.
True.
And
That's
documentation, the other thing about documentation that I think another misconception is that you have to have large amounts of it before you can take action. And
Mhm.
that's so not true either. It's not like I'm going to send you back to your desk for the next 6 months to make sure that you've got, a note every month or every week on this employee before we're able to take action on it at all.
That is so true. And here's the thing that I would also say as a tip, if your gut or your instinct is telling you, hey, maybe this person, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're showing up late, they're a little bit distracted during meetings. Let's just go from the example of employers because typically I do feel like it falls on the employer side, though as an employee,
Yeah.
you can also be doing this if you feel something is off inversely. Now, we are an employer. I feel like, okay, Heather, you seem a little, distracted at meetings. You're showing up late. Maybe things are being said funkily and an email. Like I just said the word funkily on a professional podcast.
It's okay. I feel like this is a real conversation we're
Yeah.
having because goodness knows I am distracted half the time now and I am
Oh,
showing up late for meetings. So I was like, no, Cara, no.
but hey, even if it's a one-on-one recap from email saying, hey, Heather, thank you so much for bringing up to me why you were feeling a little bit distracted recently or why you were showing up late to, um, you know, the meetings that we've been having. I appreciate this honest dialogue. Really looking forward to a mutual, plan moving forward. That's not even like a negative statement. That's a recap email, which can then be used later if the problem is not solved. So you don't have to have this formal email that's like, on January 1st, we said that you were performing poorly. No, it can just be like, hey, this is the recap email. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. This is what we're going to see. And it can be a very lighthearted, not necessarily a constructive, well, it is constructive, but destructive, I should say, or corrective is the word I'm looking for, conversation.
Yeah, and it's funny. I just had that conversation yesterday. I was coaching a leader, and one of the things I was talking to her about was how face-to-face conversations are better when you have to deliver to your employees corrective news, right? So when you're having to do any type of a performance corrective conversation, it shouldn't be in an email sent over to them because it can come across the wrong way. You don't get an opportunity for growth or change in that. And but her response to me was, but if I have a conversation, or I mean, a actual face-to-face conversation with them, then there's nothing documented.
Mm.
And so I had to go back and say, but you can always send a recap email. You can have the employee put together the recap. So another way of doing documentation is,
That's
thank you,
good.
Cara, so much for this meeting. I really appreciate it. I'd really love to see your take and action plan from what we've just talked about. So
Yes.
by end of day tomorrow, if you wouldn't mind putting down how you're feeling about the conversation we had, what your expectations are from us to help you get to where you need to be, and then let's put an action plan together with that. So you can put it back, the onus on the
Yes.
employee to come up with that corrective documentation as well as yourself if you wanted to. You don't have to, but either way, it's just a recap, like you said, of the information that has been delivered between the two parties. And it's important. One of the things that happens is a lot of times leaders wait until it's to the point where it is an
Yes.
issue, and then there's this written documentation.
Hmm.
But there's nothing that they've coached them on before that. And in their head, well, we've had these conversations over and over again, all of our one-on-ones. We talk about the blah, blah, blah. The employee is like, I've never heard this information before ever because there's a miscommunication between the two parties. And because there's no documentation that's flowed between them, absolutely no way that they're on the same page. And that's where you end up with issues because this employee is now disgruntled because this is the first time in their mind they've heard of this. Why are we going automatically to this written warning, blah, blah, blah. And the employer over here is frustrated because they feel like they've told them over and over and over again. So documentation can also help create a bridge in those moments when you do have to have the corrective conversations
Yeah.
because it's something you continue to work on through time.
Okay, so if I had to just like kind of debrief, because I feel like you had so many great tidbits in there. If you were to have tips about documentation, it's one, and this has kind of been a theme, I think, throughout all the podcasts that we've had, but have open communication always. The sooner you start building trust and having open communication, the better it will be later. And second, with recap emails, you can share responsibility. It doesn't necessarily have to be a corrective conversation. Even if it's like, hey, would you mind sending me a recap of what we talked about? We all know managers are really busy. And I think you can also kind of position it in a way of just to make sure that we're aligned and wanting the same things and that we have the same goals. Recap it in your words so that we can move forward in the same direction. That's a great sales tactic. Back in my days of when I was door
Yeah.
to door selling, it was always, can you repeat back to me? Or what I think I heard you say was, that is one of the greatest techniques to make sure that everyone is moving forward in the same way. So start early, have open communication so that things are not a surprise. Share the responsibility of documentation with your employee if you are a manager.
Yeah.
And then let's see, I think the third one that I kind of wanted to add as well is lean on the resources that we already have, which are, if we're on Zoom, using this conversation, very easy to record. Most, like
Yeah.
whether it's Google Meet or Microsoft Teams, they have now AI note takers. Those are the things that can be used in the future if you need to reference something in a conversation. Now, I will also say though, and I mean, Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, there are some one party, um, you know, legalities here and there. So you want to always make sure that, as a best practice, people know if a meeting is being recorded or if notes are being taken, just in case there is discomfort there. So I just wanted to have a little asterisk next to our recording.
Yeah. And in most of the times you'll know because
Most of the
especially
times,
even on Zoom, it tells you, hey, so
Mhm.
this meeting's being recorded. Are you okay with that? But you do need to be careful of recording phone, online, whatever the case may be, any of your conversations without making sure that the other party's aware of that. But
Yeah,
documentation can be recordings. You're absolutely right. It doesn't
absolutely.
have to be. I wish I did that more often because I am really terrible about having notes from my meetings that I've had, but then never having the time to transition it
Yeah,
into a document that's not my chicken scratch. And so I really should use all of the other resources that we have available. I think I'm just kind of old school that way. But I
yeah,
will say that the other thing about documentation that I think people have a misconception is a lot of states are an at-will state. And so people assume that means you
yeah.
don't need any documentation to remove someone from their position. And that is so false. And that can get you in so much trouble.
So
There's
false.
very little reasons that you can just let somebody go for at will. You need to be very careful. And you really should have correct documentation because you have no idea what else has been occurring inside of the organization. And so you let someone go and then they come back and say, hey, it wasn't a safe work environment. I felt it was hostile, whatever the case may be. You have no documentation showing why you let them go. Not a good fit is really hard to prove as an
Yeah,
employer, especially if you've allowed that employee to be there for any length of time. It just is.
yeah. And I'm really excited that HMP is putting together kind of an HR box, which has lots of
I know.
templates and tools and resources, because I do think just having kind of a template to know what to look for. And if you are working toward a corrective action plan, having a template to see, okay, so like what exactly do I need to fill out? And just kind of knowing, okay, what am I looking for? What is a good amount of documentation or examples are provided to be able to move to this phase? That is so helpful because you were the one that taught me there are multiple types of corrective action. We have
Yeah.
like what we've been talking about, a formal corrective action plan where it's like, okay, you've done this, this, and this. We saw it on this, this, and this dates. But there's also disciplinary actions, the verbal warnings. There's
Mhm.
so many different styles and types. And I also want to take a moment because we are talking like primarily about performance documentation, but documentation can extend, and there's so many realms. It's having a really solid handbook so that you can have something to
Okay.
fall back on and have those kind of easier to have, this wasn't being followed. Our attendance expectations are listed here in the handbook. Or we talked about this in job description. That is also a document having
Yep.
whether it's physical requirements in there so that if someone is injured, we do want to be able to support them, but it helps us define what is a reasonable accommodation for their role. So documentation is a lot more than just performance, but that is what we feel
Performance.
like we're focusing on for this particular conversation. But with that being said, and this could kind of fit into performance, let's say you have done all the documentation, because I have come across this scenario.
Oh,
Done the
okay.
documentation, you've put someone on a corrective action plan, and they do it. They have progressed and they are now back on track. 3 months later, you see
You're back where
repeat
you were.
offenders.
Yeah.
And that is just the trend. It's like corrective action plan, they get off of it. Then how do you get back on it? What is the documentation needed? Because technically the documentation just said they're good. What do we do?
So first of all, I would caution people who are doing documentation, performance improvement plan, etc., that in the follow-up, in the end of the period of time that you have them on a performance improvement plan, I always document, haha, inside of that last document, I specifically put in there behavior that continues like this again, or if this behavior starts again, or if this change isn't permanent, corrective action will occur again, up to and including termination. And then that's what I do. Like if it happens all over again, depending upon whether it's something small that you can continue to correct, or if it's a pattern that you've seen over and over again and it's impacting the work environment, the other employees, the bottom line, then you already have done the documentation that's necessary
Mm.
to just go ahead and do a termination off of it.
Okay, that is helpful because I don't think I've ever seen a clause like that. And would you,
Yeah.
so the language in that would not necessarily have a time span, but it's consistently improved. What
Yeah.
if, and this is again, we're thinking documentation and like thematically, we talked about attendance, punctuality, professionalism in the examples previously, but let's say you hit those three areas and then now it's a new behavior that wasn't previously an issue. Because again,
Those are the worst. I've had that happen. I've had that happen.
okay, yeah,
Those
because
are the
I,
worst because you can't hold somebody accountable for something that you haven't talked to them about. So just because you're frustrated because they were on an improvement plan for attendance, let's just use that, right? And the attendance was so bad that other people were filling in the gap all the time, this kind of stuff. So you put them on a performance improvement plan. 3 months go by. They've totally fixed that. They're doing well. And now all of a sudden, they can't play nice with others. They're not getting along
yes,
with their team, but they're on time every day. There's all this confrontation that's going on in the team dynamics. And it has everything to do with this one individual. You can't now go, you know what? We've already had a performance improvement plan. We're going to have to let you go. If that wasn't part of what the performance improvement plan or the documentation was about, right? It's a totally separate situation. It's hard though, because you're already frustrated because you've already invested all this time and energy into correcting something you shouldn't have had to correct because it
yes.
should have just been there. And now you're starting all over again. And you're like, I just don't want to do it. You don't have to put them back on another improvement plan. You can give them just a warning, and if it continues to happen, you can move past just the warning into, termination if necessary. But be careful not to count the two as one, right? They're two
Okay,
separate
okay,
incidents, two separate stages, right? Unless in your initial improvement plan, I usually will list out more than one item if there's more than one. So don't assume that documentation means you can only put one thing in here for improvement or for
yeah,
warning or whatever. It can be an encompassing, right? These are my
okay,
expectations of you, Cara, as an employee, and here are the ones that you're falling short on. Boom, 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 right? If that's the case. And then if that happened again, and it was one of those particular items, even if it wasn't one that you addressed in great detail, but it was one of the other items that you had as an expectation that you weren't
mhm,
meeting, then you wouldn't have to do more documentation. Then you could go, okay, this is, and then stems back to, and then talk about that.
okay. And that's actually a really great piece that I was hoping that we could get into is tips for specificity or how broad to make documentation and what to or maybe not to include in documentation. So,
Yeah.
do you have any tips or recommendations for
Yeah, be
let's
careful what you
yeah.
do include
Yeah.
in documentation. Be careful that it has everything to do with performance and nothing else. And what I mean by that is be careful that it's not personal, right? So you need to make sure that you're not saying things like, you're not as fast as so and so, or
Okay.
your quality of work is not as good as so and so. Because who's to say so and so isn't male and you're female? Who's to say so and so isn't in their 30s and you're in your
Okay.
60s? Like there, even if that wasn't what you meant, it could easily come across that way. So never ever do comparisons to other
Mhm.
people. It's about you and your performance, you and your attitude in those moments when you're doing your documentation. So be cautious of that and never use subjective words like faster than or slower than. Give it a
Mm,
quantitative number, right? Our expectation is that you make 100 phone calls a day, like not you need to improve on the number of phone calls you make. Okay, I'm
yes.
going to do one more than the three I'm already doing.
Oh my
I've
goodness.
improved, right? So make sure that you're setting realistic goals, but make sure that you're giving someone something that they can actually strive for, because otherwise they're never going to be successful if they don't know what that expectation is.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you hit on something. Again, I get really passionate about the most random things, but quantitative things, like
Oh yeah.
having, I care about this in minimum qualifications for a job as well as in a performance improvement plan or corrective action plan. Those need to be measurable. It can't just say like, I don't know.
My
Sometimes
my
people
biggest
put,
pet peeve is the ones that say you need a better attitude. what in the
Yeah,
heck does that mean?
yeah,
Like, what is a better attitude?
yeah. Or like do the marketing and communications duties. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? And how
Yeah.
do I know that I'm like supposed to do it? So all of that to say is make it measurable. And even if it's a soft skill, such as having to like being more of a team player, you can create like a goal around that of saying like, um, offer up one constructive idea at a team meeting,
Yeah.
or strive to partner with, or not strive, strive is not a one, but partner with this person to create a plan by this date for a go forward plan for this marketing and communications project or something. There are ways to make soft skills, especially even measurable. So
Yeah.
get creative, work with HR. We're very good at creating goals for
Yes.
the most unique of situations, even if it's an attitude adjustment. And you and I have had this example before. It was the individual who had, I wouldn't call it a more sensitive, empathetic, sympathetic approach to the world and felt world events very deeply, which impacted her attendance, this
Oh,
individual.
yes. Yes.
And
Now I know
so,
exactly who you're talking about. Yeah.
yes, when they're calling out because a news headline impacted them negatively and they felt emotional over it. There are ways to address that attitude, to your point,
Yeah.
and make it a measurable goal. Or even in documentation, you can address it not in a way of like, oh my gosh, you just have a poor attitude. You don't not necessarily write that down, but maybe to your point, how would you phrase it if it was like, wow, this person just has a lot of feelings and therefore are not present and not a great team player and seem very negative. How would
Well,
you?
you kind of said part of it.
Oh,
So,
did I? Oh,
but so before I ever got to any type of performance documentation for that, I would set them down and say, hey, you do not seem like you are as engaged or as successful
that's
as
right.
you used to be in this role. Is there something that's going on? Is there something that's
Hmm.
happening? Is there a reason? Because, and you have to do it that way before you address it in a negative way. And the reason I say that is because you have no idea if they're not getting bullied by the rest of the team, or something occurred with another teammate that they're not comfortable telling you, but it's been bothering them. Or they've got a medical diagnosis that they just got that, I mean,
Yes.
there's a million things that could be going on in that person's life that's changed their behavior. So my recommendation always is to sit down with them first. Doesn't there's very few things that you shouldn't do that first. Even
Yeah.
attendance, right? Like, hey, you used to be on time every day, and now you are a half an hour late and you don't call in. Is something going on? Is there a reason that's happening?
Right.
Because you need to know. Because the worst thing that can happen is you start to reprimand and find out they have, I don't know, cancer treatment every morning before they come into the work, right? They should have told us so we could help protect them because there's so many things that could protect them. But maybe they're embarrassed and they don't want to tell us, right?
Mhm.
Or they're going through some major life issue, a divorce or whatever the case may be. We need to know that. One, because they're human and we care about our people and we want to make sure that we can support them the right way. But
Mhm.
two, some of those things are protected. And so if we reprimand them, even
Yes.
without our knowledge for things that are protected, that is also not good as an employer. So sit down, have the conversation first, get to the bottom of it, and then set your expectations. And then if it doesn't change, that's when I would jump into the improvement. And then that's what I would do in the improvement. I would say, per all of the coaching conversations that we've had up to date, and you could list them out if you wanted to.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that we've mentioned as an expectation of this position is to be a positive contributor to the team. Right now, you are not. Right
Mm.
now, people are not comfortable working with you because of blank, 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 blank. You bully them, you yell at them, you don't engage, whatever it is, right, that's going on.
And back those up with some examples. If
Yep. If they're, yeah, exactly. And you better have examples, otherwise it's just words,
yeah.
right? And then I would say in the documentation, moving forward, our expectation is that you find a way to come back to the table in a positive, contributing manner with the rest of the team so
Mhm.
that we can move forward on the projects, right? Or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. But put it back on the work, not on the attitude.
Okay.
So I
And
wouldn't say you're being negative. I'd say you're not contributing positively towards, or you're not meeting the value and culture goals of the organization because of this, this, or this. But Don't make it about the negative, make it about what you're looking for from them.
Okay, I love that. And my last kind of unique documentation scenario, but I'm sure all of us have seen it. We
Oh,
have the documentation, or we put somebody on a PIP or CAP, in a corrective action plan, and then all of a sudden there is maybe, and let's say previously ADA, like any sort of accommodations were discussed. You've had the conversation of, hey, what's been going on? And nothing has been brought up medically. Um,
I
and now
hate
we
these
have
moments.
the
Yes.
documentation of saying, you are, we know that this is, we need to see some corrective improvement. And now
And
the
then
employer saying,
magically there's something, yeah.
I'm going out on FMLA, or I actually have insert, whatever
Whatever.
condition it is here.
Ugh.
Now, what do? We do have, let's pretend we do have documentation, or at least enough to at least have gone to a point of a corrective conversation. What do we do?
What would you do?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I think any scenario where there is a medical condition being presented, it needs to be taken with a level of compassion and care and seriousness. So it's okay. All right, let's talk about this. And typically, if you are an FMLA, there is a medical certification required.
Yeah.
So I would say let's maybe take our emotions and maybe our suspicions out of it. Let's look at this human and say and follow the process. Okay, if you want to go out on FMLA, you need to get, or any sort of leave, medical certification from your doctor, and let's see first if there is not a reasonable accommodation that can be met. Now, that's probably where I would start. Am I on the right track?
You are, because what you want to do is you want to separate the two.
Mm-hmm.
You want to always separate the two because they want to bring them together so that their behavior cannot be addressed because of whatever that situation or issue
That's
is. If they're bringing them up at the same time, that's exactly what's happening in that moment.
right. No.
Especially if you've never heard it before. So
Yeah,
separate
and you
the
gave him
two.
a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, separate the two. Talk about the medical condition, the need for leave, whatever it is, address that. Put a little bow on it and then go back and then go back to addressing the other behavior, right?
Okay.
Hey, so let me know when you've got that documentation, the medical certification, when you want to sit down and go through accommodations, whatever it is, right? So now that we're good on that, let's go back and talk about the attendance again
Okay.
because I
Okay.
need I need to find a solution for why you're not calling in. I get that there may be a medical reason why you're late, but you're still not following our process, right? So
I
here's the
love that.
process
Hmm.
that our expectation is I need this to be met,
Okay.
right?
We can still show compassion and still support and still see you through this time. However, you still need to meet these standards. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So if it is attendance, it's like, okay, we understand you're going through something and you might need some time, but you need to communicate that
Yeah.
with us. And if that cannot be met, we need to figure out how we can move forward in a way that is supportive
Yeah.
to your team members as well as yourself. Okay, I like that because unfortunately, I do think that happens.
It does.
Um,
I've had it happen to me many times. Yeah.
it has happened quite a few times as well to me. And honestly, this was the best case scenario where there was communication and documentation prior. Most often, they
I know there's nothing.
people know they can kind of sense when things are going crazy. Whoop,
Oh yeah.
and they will probably go on FMLA before you even have a chance to have
Yep.
the formal
Trying to make themselves
documentation.
bulletproof. Yep. Oh yeah. Been there.
So that is a tough
Um,
one. I had to think. Okay, so we talked about some tips. Always have a conversation. Come from a place of curiosity. You don't have to be super, you know, intense with how your documentation looks. It can be emails. It doesn't have to be acknowledged. But the tip and trick is here. Honestly, just have really good email organization and have good
yeah.
recaps. That is enough. That is sufficient.
Make sure that you are just documenting in whatever form or capacity is the easiest for you to use.
Mhm.
Try and standardize it. Use the same one for all the situations that you do so that it's easier, one, like you said, to find it, but
Mhm.
two, also because that builds up a normal practice for you when you're doing the same thing. If you're one time writing it, one time doing this, then one, you won't be able to find your documentation, but two, you also won't make it a standard inside of what your normal practice as a leader is. And that's important.
Hmm.
And then the other takeaway, honestly, like you said, is things like that HR box that we're building at HM Pinnacle are super valuable because it's going to have the tools. So you're not reinventing the wheel. So that
Yeah.
you're not going, what do I do this time? You've got tools in place. So reach out to your HR team, reach out to HM Pinnacle, whatever it is. That's what we're all here for in HR is to help put that in practice and in motion so leaders have an ability to have really great, healthy communications with their employees. Employees have an opportunity to make improvements from those conversations, and then the organization succeeds. Like that's the whole value behind it.
Yeah, I love that. Include us early. We want to help. And it will
Yeah.
be, although documentation can feel painful, it can feel like a lot. If it starts early, you kind of spread that burden, and there is guidance there. There are tools there, and there is support there. So, with all of that being said, there are resources. We both feel like documentation is powerful, is helpful, and does not have to be difficult or daunting. Because so often do we hear a manager say, I would rather just, keep this person than go through the whole process. No, that's not fair to the manager or the employee. So,
And not necessary. Yeah.
with that being said, we're going to close out this HR talk with HM Pinnacle. Just remember, if you think you've had a bad day in HR, every challenge is an opportunity to grow. So thank you for spending time with HM Pinnacle. Until the next time.